Peace and blessings on your day. Thank you again for joining us for another Holy Trinity Parish Bible study from Bremerton, Washington. This coming weekend, we have another collection of rather short Bible readings, but they can challenge us because each of them presents a question of perspective. With whom do we identify the most closely out of this coming weekend's biblical characters and passages? Do we find ourselves associating with Jeremiah's persecutions and his anger at God? Do we identify with the psalmist's longing for God? Do we look to St. Paul, who offers an encouraging word for us? And in the gospel, how do we react to Jesus rejecting the notion that good people never suffer? And then Jesus, of course, challenging us to take up our cross and follow him. In this biblical illustration, the French artist Gustave Doré depicts Jeremiah surrounded by a crowd of people who don't seem particularly interested in what he has to say. This coming Sunday, the scriptures give us the fifth of Jeremiah's confessions. They're called confessions because they are deeply personal laments to God directly. Can we identify with this? When life goes so wrong, do we think that somehow God has wronged us? And while this might be shocking to some Christians and other people of religion, it's actually what we read often enough in the Old Testament, from Job, often from the psalmist, and certainly from the prophet Jeremiah.
You duped me, O Lord, and I let myself be duped. You were too strong for me, and you triumphed. All the day I am an object of laughter. Everyone mocks me. Whenever I speak, I must cry out, violence and outrage is my message. The word of the Lord has brought me derision and reproach all the day. I say to myself, I will not mention him. I will speak in his name no more. But then it becomes like fire burning in my heart, imprisoned in my bones. I grow weary holding it in. I cannot endure it.
You may remember that earlier this summer, Father's Day weekend, in fact, we heard another portion of this fifth confession of Jeremiah from the 20th chapter of the book. If you're interested in reading these more in detail and getting a sense of the personal relationship Jeremiah had with his God, these are the scripture citations from the book of Jeremiah. You can look them up, and I'm sure that you'll find them very powerful reading. The wilderness, the desert, was very close to the ancient nation of Israel. And certainly the experience of being in the desert, away from home, and longing for home was certainly part of a traveler's inspiration in those days. In Psalm 63, the singer is seeking refuge in God, something like an oasis. The psalmist trusts that God will be there at the end of the journey with something life-giving, life-sustaining for him.
My soul is thirsting for you, O Lord my God. O God, you are my God whom I seek. For you my flesh pines and my soul thirsts, like the earth, parched, lifeless, and without water. Thus have I gazed toward you in the sanctuary, to see your power and your glory. For your kindness is a greater good than life. My lips shall glorify you. Thus will I bless you while I live. Lifting up my hands, I will call upon your name. As with the riches of a banquet shall my soul be satisfied, and with exultant lips my mouth shall praise you. You are my help, and in the shadow of your wings I shout for joy. My soul clings fast to you. Your right hand upholds me.
There is something of a forlorn quality to this. The psalmist recognizes that something is missing in life, but there's this sense of trust that at the end of the journey, that God will be there to be found. And indeed, God will be there all through the journey as we Christians have that hope and trust in our God. Let's turn now to St. Paul the Apostle. What do you notice in this depiction by the French painter Claude Vignon? Notice Paul's sword, color of his clothing, gestures, and of course, as he's often depicted, in the middle of a writing project. With the 12th chapter of the letter to the Romans, we find the apostle leaving behind the deeper theology of the previous chapters. And here, through the end of the letter, he gives advice to the Christian community in Rome. And then the question, of course, for us today is, does his advice apply to us? Does it apply individually to me or to you? Does it apply to our parish? St. Paul has high ideals, and his gaze is always directed beyond himself and beyond the present.
I urge you, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God, your spiritual worship. Do not conform yourselves to this age, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and pleasing and perfect.
A side note here, this is the scripture reading that was chosen by Britain's Prince William and Princess Kate for their wedding some years ago. It's also an option for the rite of matrimony for Roman Catholics. In this brief passage, St. Paul is urging his followers not to judge with the world's judgment, but to look to Christ and to judge as Jesus would judge all aspects of our lives, how we live, how we move, how we work and play, and our relationships as well. Rejecting the judgment, the morals, the mores of the world, this is very much a part of the doctrine of the cross, of imitating Jesus to the point of suffering and even dying for the mission. It's a difficult message to swallow and to absorb. But this scripture passage for the coming Sunday gives us a two-part presentation. First, Jesus predicts the passion. Peter resists, and then Jesus rebukes him hastily and harshly. In the second portion of the reading, Jesus doubles down, and he equates discipleship with following his example, taking up one's obstacles and burdens, and not avoiding the troubles and difficulties. Let's hear the narration.
Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer greatly from the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. Then Peter took Jesus aside and began to rebuke him. God forbid, Lord, no such thing shall ever happen to you. He turned and said to Peter, Get behind me, Satan. You are an obstacle to me. You are thinking not as God does, but as human beings do. Then Jesus said to his disciples, Whoever wishes to come after me must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. What profit would there be for one to gain the whole world and forfeit his life? Or what can one give in exchange for his life? For the Son of Man will come with his angels in his Father's glory, and then he will repay all according to his conduct.
This notion of divine punishment and reward, this was a tenet of Judaism, and for Christians, we recognize Jesus as the agent of this final judgment. Jesus is the last judge, according to our tradition. Where do the coming Sunday scripture readings leave us? Well, it would seem not in an entirely comfortable place. We have dealt with strong emotion toward God, the sense of being without God and the longing for Him, that sense of hopefulness for the future that St. Paul preaches, and Jesus' own warning about aligning ourselves with His judgments, His ways, His priorities. Worth a lot of deep reflection, these readings, I think. And I leave you off now with wishes and hopes for blessings and peace in the coming week and good discernment as you strive to follow Christ's way and make His way your way.